The Center for the Improvement of Human Functioning International presents this luncheon lecture. Today's topic, declining food quality and efforts to improve it. Your presenter, Donald R. Davis, Ph.D.
I noticed two very young people today in the audience, and I asked about that, and I learned it's spring break up here. As some of you may know, I live in Austin, Texas, where I work at the University of Texas. I come up here 4 days a month, and this is a little extra treat for me outside this snow. We don't see it very often. Probably you don't either this time of year so much. Anyhow, we had our spring break last week down in Austin, but I understand it's spring break here, and that's why we have two very young ones attending today. I'm going to be talking today about the subject of declining nutrient contents, which is a relatively recent discovery that we have participated in here at the Center and at the University of Texas, as you'll see. And I might mention that I presented some of this information at a meeting last month in St. Louis, a national meeting of a large scientific organization. And this is new information to a lot of people about these declines and what we might be able to do about it. This dilution effect, this is the title of a paper that was published in 1981. This dilution effect, I think, is a very important part of what's going on. This was published in Advances in Agronomy, 1981. It's a long review article with 100 references in it. The basic idea in this article is that when we do things to increase the yield of crops, especially they were talking about fertilization and irrigation, these are environmental things that we do, it tends to dilute the nutrient content of the foods. You're getting more plant, but you're not getting correspondingly more nutrients to go with the plant, so they are diluted. This has been known since the 1970s. It is so well known among agricultural scientists that when they refer to this dilution effect, they usually do not give a reference to it, as if everyone knows about it. Nevertheless, this one article has received 169 citations in a scientific index, and yet it is surprisingly unknown to people in the organic farming field, in the nutrition field, among public advocates. Surprisingly unknown. For all these years, agricultural scientists have known about it, but I had never heard about it until very recently. Now here is an example that was published in 1979 in raspberry plants. This study planted the plants in soil that contained 12 parts per million phosphorus, and then the experimenters added either 0, 22, or 44 parts per million of extra phosphorus as a fertilizer to these plants. And they measured the relative amounts of quite a few different minerals here, phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, and so on. And what they found was, at the highest concentration of added phosphorus, the amount of phosphorus in the plant had increased by about 20%. But the concentration of every other mineral in the plant had gone down, often by more than 20%. For example, it was more than a 50% loss here in the concentration of copper. The explanation of this is down in this box in the bottom. The relative yields, there was a yield of 1 with no added phosphorus, a yield 1.4 times greater with the 22 parts per million, and a yield of 2.2 times more. There was 2.2 times more plant with the 44 parts per million added phosphorus. More than twice as much plant, but there were not correspondingly larger amounts of all of these other minerals that had been uptaked into the plant, and so they were diluted in a larger volume of plant. Now, the result of this kind of environmental dilution effect plus genetic dilution effects, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, have caused, in some cases, some pretty large declines. I don't want you to think that this is common. This is an unusually large example of a nutrient decline, in this case in broccoli and calcium. Compared to 1950, the amount of calcium published in the tables by USDA has gone down in 1963, 1982, and 2003. There's approximately a 2/3 loss from here to here in the amount of calcium. Fortunately, the evidence is that magnesium has remained pretty constant through this time, not the same kind of decline. And again, this 2/3 decline over 50 years is an unusually large decline. On the average, they're quite a bit smaller than that. But this one is pretty well documented. And it's interesting also because of this entry at the right of the slide. Marathon is a new high-yield variety of broccoli that was introduced in 1985 and has been dominant since the early 1990s. And it has even lower concentrations of calcium, approximately an 80% lower amount than the value in 1950. This was recently published in the year 2000. Now that study in 2000 is very interesting in another way because it is the first published example that I know of what I have called a genetic dilution effect. What the researchers planted not only Marathon, but 26 other varieties of broccoli, all of them commercial hybrids. They planted them during 2 different years, 1996 and 97, in fields side by side. The 27 different varieties of broccoli all were in the same soil. They had the same climate. They had the same fertilization, the same irrigation. They had all of the environmental aspect was the same, but these different varieties of broccoli have different yields. And so what the researchers did was to look at the correlation between the yield of the plant and the concentration of calcium and magnesium. And what I'm plotting here is the correlation between yield and mineral concentration. Notice the sign here, it's a negative correlation, which means it's an inverse correlation, that as the yield of the plant goes up, the concentration of calcium and magnesium goes down. The maximum possible correlation is right here, a correlation of 1. That would be that would mean you have a perfect plot between yield and concentration. It's not perfect, but these are pretty substantial correlation coefficients, around 50, 60, 70% of the maximum correlation that's possible in an inverse way. The higher the yield, the lower the concentration of these two minerals. Now this is a very, very interesting observation. Like I said, it's the first time that I know that this genetic dilution effect has ever been shown. During the course of our research here, I discovered another paper, this one having to do with a very similar kind of study in 14 different varieties of wheat. They had been introduced between 1873 and 1995. Again, these were planted in 2 different areas of Kansas, and the researchers measured a correlation between yield and mineral concentration. The environmental aspects were all the same. The only thing that was different among these 14 varieties of wheat is that they had different yields. The older varieties tended to have lower yields. The more recent varieties had higher yields. And again, there were consistently negative correlations between yield and concentrations, in this case, of 6 different minerals: iron, zinc, copper, phosphorus, sulfur, and selenium. Now, for the scientists in the audience, these little asterisks tell you something about how reliable this result is. The bigger it is, the more reliable it is. Some of these smaller correlations, such as these, are not what scientists call statistically significant, but the trend is there, and notice that the trend is always in the negative direction. There are no trends in the other direction. So here is the second and of only 2 demonstrations that I know of showing this genetic dilution effect, inverse correlation between genetic potential for yield and mineral concentrations. And I believe that probably these genetic effects are stronger than the environmental effects that were known back in the 70s. Well, this raises the question, how large and how widespread are these effects in our food supply? And I'm going to mention now 3 different historical studies that have been published that give some answers to this question. The first one was published in 1997 involving United Kingdom data for minerals in fruits and vegetables. The 2004 paper was published by a research group here at the center involving U.S. data involving more nutrients. And then just last November, there was a 3rd paper published, and I'll mention it as well. This is the first one published in 97, data on 20 vegetables. These data came from the United Kingdom from the 1930s to the 1980s, and what I'm showing here is the average percent decline in the 20 vegetables for 5 different minerals: calcium, phosphorus, iron, potassium, and magnesium. The 2 statistically significant ones were magnesium and calcium. These are trends that are not 100% reliable, but again, notice that they are all declines. There are no increases being reported here. This is a summary of our research involving more foods, more nutrients, and using U.S. data published by the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1950 and 1999. During that 50-year period, we found pretty consistent decreases. There were 2 foods here for which there was no evidence of any change at all. We found a decline on the average of 6% for protein, 6% for ash, which is mainly potassium in the food. Out of the 3 minerals that we studied, calcium, phosphorus, and iron, these were all showing statistically significant declines. Vitamin A looks like a decline, but we can't be real sure because there weren't that many foods that had vitamin A in them. The largest decrease was for riboflavin, also known as vitamin B2. And then there was a decline of about 20% for vitamin C. Again, these are average declines. Technically, the median declines, half of the declines were bigger than this, half of them were smaller. In some cases, there were even increases. And we think that is due to changes in the varieties that have been planted over the years. You can get an accidental increase or decrease just for that reason. This is the 3rd and last study that has been published just last November. I reanalyzed this data because unfortunately the authors used a method that doesn't fit the data very well. It doesn't change the results a whole lot, but it does make a difference, and I'm publishing a letter to the editor about this shortly. They studied In this case, U.S. crops ranging from 16 to 50. They were mostly vegetables, some fruits, and a few nuts were included in their study. And they found declines ranging from about 10% to almost 40% in the case of calcium. They reported a 78% decline for iron, but I put a question mark after that number because it probably is not true. Back in the 1930s, when that data came out, people were not aware that very tiny amounts of clinging dirt on a food sample will have more iron in it than the food itself. So many of the older values for iron in foods are too high. And it's quite possible that that is why there is such an apparently large decline, because the older values were too high. They reported 78%. Remember, in our study, the decline was in iron was only about 30%, or about 15%, right here. Now, a lot of people just automatically think to themselves, aha, I can solve this problem by eating organic foods. Unfortunately, I don't think that that is true. Many claims have been made over the years for higher vitamin and mineral content in organic foods, but those comparisons usually are not done very well. One of the things they don't do is they don't adjust for differences in moisture content. And the ones that I have looked at, I've not been very impressed with. I am impressed that there seems to be a fairly consistently slightly higher level of vitamin C in organically grown foods. But in my opinion, the differences for other vitamins and minerals are too small to be very convincingly measured. One of the problems in these studies is that there's quite a bit of variation in conventional foods and in organic foods, and because of the variations within the systems, it is hard to document differences between them. I'm going to show you two examples of this kind of data, both of them published very recently. This one is in a paper that was published in January of this year. A comparison of organic and conventional Gala apples done in Washington State by university researchers. What I'm plotting here are the ratios of organic over conventional. So this line right here is the key reference point to look at. If the ratio is 1, it means that organic is the same as conventional in the level of minerals. Anything above 1 means that the organic food was higher. Anything below 1 means that the conventional food was higher. The data here are for 2 different years, 2002, 2003. And they had a problem in 2002. The organic crop did not do very well. The yields were low. And you notice that the mineral concentrations tended to be low as well. They got things together much better in 2003, and actually the organic crop that year was about 40% greater than the conventional crop in yield. They had a good bumper crop. The nutrient levels tended to be higher. But notice even there aren't very many that are much higher. For phosphorus, we've got maybe a 20% higher level. For boron, we've got maybe 15% higher amount. Higher amounts for calcium and iron, or copper and iron. But there are still a number of nutrients here that are lower in the organic food. And over here, I've shown you the average. The average organic was 80% of conventional in 2002. The average in 2003 for all of these nutrients is 1.01. for an average difference of 1%, which isn't worth arguing about. Very similar results were published in 2004 in a similar kind of comparison with yellow pears. This work was done in Italy. They did the study for 3 years, and what I'm showing you here is the average data for all 3 years combined. Protein, a bunch of minerals, then we got fiber, vitamin C. This is alpha tocopherol and gamma tocopherol, which are two forms of vitamin E, beta carotene, vitamin K, and the average. Now, it looks as though there's a 15-20% advantage for these minerals right here, but there is a disadvantage for iron, copper, vitamin C. That's unusual, that vitamin C is lower in the organic. One form of vitamin E was lower, the other was higher. Beta carotene was a lot lower in the organic, and so forth. And again, the average of all of these numbers is very close to 1. So this is why I say there is very little good evidence, in my opinion, for superiority of organically grown foods for vitamins and minerals, except for vitamin C. Now, it turns out, however, things are not totally bleak for organic foods. They are better in other ways. Obviously, the main idea of this is to avoid residues of pesticides and herbicides, and no one argues that properly grown organic foods are definitely a lot lower in those undesired residues. There is also some recent documentation for the many anecdotal claims that organic foods taste better. In the case of that Washington State study of apples, for example, I'll show you data on that actually. They also had evidence that the organic apples kept better. There is also emerging evidence in the last few years for higher levels of antioxidants and other phytochemicals. These are not in the same category of vitamins and minerals, things that we have to have in our diet, but they are things that we are learning in the last 10 years or so are part of why fruits and vegetables are beneficial for us. These are not essential, but they are beneficial to us. There is also some interesting emerging evidence in the last few years that organically grown foods not only have higher levels of these beneficial phytochemicals, but when you test those foods in test tubes against cancer cells and against mutations in human cells, that the organic foods are superior in preventing these disorders. And I'm going to illustrate that too with a study in strawberries. Here is going back to that study of Gala apples at Washington State. Remember 2002, 2003? They had a very bad year in the organic crop in 2002, but look at this. When they measured the total antioxidants, in the peel and in the flesh and total in the apples, there was a consistent picture in both years that total antioxidants were somewhere around 15 to 20% higher on the average in the organic apples compared to the conventional apples. And they did a blind consumer acceptance study too with 48 untrained observers and asked them to rate the apples for flavor and firmness and some other qualities and for overall acceptance. And they came up with this interesting, consistent observation. They only did this in 2003 for greater consumer acceptance of the organically grown crop. I'd like to point out that the peel of an apple contains about 85% of these total antioxidants. So when people peel an apple, and sometimes they'll do that to avoid residues that they're concerned about on the peel, they're losing about 85% of these total antioxidants. So for some people that would be another advantage of organically grown if they would feel that they wouldn't have to peel them, because most of these are in the peel. Now, here is another study. This one was also published just this year. A comparison of antioxidants in 3 organic versus 4 conventional strawberries. This is a combined average of all 7 varieties. This is ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. This is dehydroascorbic acid, which is a partially oxidized, slightly less desirable form of vitamin C. This is the ratio of the two. Ellagic acid, hydroxycinnamic acid, flavonols, phenolics, anthocyanins. These are different categories of these antioxidant phytochemicals that I've been telling you about, that you've been hearing about, that are in tea and chocolate and red wine and so forth. They come in these different categories. And in these organic strawberries, there was a tendency for a somewhat higher level. This would be maybe 15-20% higher, 20% higher levels in the organic strawberries compared to the conventional strawberries. Now, they didn't stop at this point. They went on and took extracts of these strawberries and added them to test tubes in which they were growing live human cells, but these were cancer cells, colon cancer cells, breast cancer cells. I'm showing you data for where they added 0.25% of strawberry extract to the test tube and 0.5% extract to the test tube. And you see that compared to the test tubes without any strawberry added, for example, when they added 0.25% of the extract, the growth of the colon cancer cells was only 70%. In other words, it was suppressed by 30%. And when they added more strawberry extract, it depressed it further, down to about 50% of growth. And similar thing happened with breast cancer cells. The extracts were suppressing the growth of these cells in the test tube. Now this is with the average of the 4 conventionally grown strawberries. Now they did the same thing over again with the 3 organically grown strawberries, and they found this result. Again, suppression, but the suppression was a little bit larger. I'll flip back to the previous slide. You see there is some additional suppression by the organically grown strawberries. This is really interesting. This is going beyond just measuring the contents, the chemical contents. This is measuring a functional property of the cells, the way they affect living cells. It's still not proof that eating these strawberries will help suppress cancer in your body. We're a long ways from being able to produce that kind of data, but it is one step in that direction. This result was quite a strong result. I'm showing you now the result in a different form, the ratio of organic over conventional growth in the test tubes. Using all of the strawberries, the 4 conventional and the 3 organic, the average suppression was about 20%. The growth was 80% in the organically grown. But this was true also in the 2 individual varieties of strawberries where the researchers had grown the strawberries in both the conventional and the organic system. So it was a very consistent result that the organically grown strawberries had only about, in the cell growth studies, had only about 70 or 80% of the growth that was seen with the conventional strawberries. So this kind of evidence is quite new and is impressive to me, that although Vitamins and minerals don't seem to be superior in organically grown foods. These antioxidant phytochemicals and their function with human cells seems to be superior. Now, there have been a number of other studies like these two that I just talked about that were reviewed in this review published by the Organic Center last year. The website reference is given there. You can find their report. There's a 6-page short version and there's an 80-page long version of their review. These are all pointing in the direction. They come to the conclusion that in these 7 studies there was an average 30% higher level of antioxidants and other phytochemicals in the organically grown compared to the conventionally grown fruits and vegetables. This presumably means that the plants are healthier for us. It probably implies that they're better for us in doing all of the good things that vegetables, that we know fruits and vegetables do, like preventing heart disease and cancer and diabetes and hypertension and you name it. The more fruits and vegetables people eat, the less incidence they have of many different kinds of diseases. And so the presumption here is that the higher levels of these antioxidants mean that the organically grown foods will be superior in promoting human health. But a skeptic can say, hey, you haven't proven that yet. And that's certainly true. It'll be quite a while before we have proof of that. It's hard to do such studies. So we're moving along quite well here. This is a summary of what we know, or what I think we know, about declining nutrient levels in foods. Beginning about in the 1970s and culminating with that 1981 review that I cited at the beginning, we learned about these environmental dilution effects which relate to particularly fertilization and irrigation and the timing of these things to promote maximum growth of plants. Then we have just recently recognized what I've called genetic dilution effects, the examples being in broccoli and in wheat, where when you plant different varieties that have a different potential for yield, all in the same environment, same fertilization, you find that higher genetic potential for yield results in a tendency for lower concentrations of nutrients. 2 studied in the case of broccoli, 6 studied in the case of wheat. And then there are the 3 historical comparisons that have been published now, showing with data from the UK and from the United States that there are average declines typically in the area of 50% to 35% over a 50-year period or so in nutrient levels in particularly fruits and vegetables. These are our best evidence of what these environmental and genetic dilution effects are doing to our foods. The studies showing higher levels of antioxidant phytochemicals in organically grown foods implies that we've had a similar loss of these beneficial substances in foods over the last 50 years, which has basically been the time that we've changed from everybody was practically doing organic farming 50 years ago compared to today where we're doing very intensive fertilization, pesticides, weed control, and all of those kinds of things. We'll never know for sure because nobody was measuring these antioxidants 50 years ago. All we've got is the evidence that when you go back to a more old-fashioned kind of farming, you raise the level of these antioxidants. Do we know whether it's going to be possible to reverse these declines in vitamins and minerals, I don't know. I have argued here that it doesn't look like organic farming is the solution to the declines in vitamins and minerals. The evidence that organic farming raises these is pretty inconsistent, pretty weak in my view. It may be that the only way that we can reduce the declines in vitamins and minerals is to go back to a less intensive kind of farming where we use less fertilization, use older varieties of plants that do not produce such high yields. That may be the only way we're going to be able to overcome those declines. I don't know. There are people in the organic community that I've been in touch with in the last few years. They have high hopes that they'll be able to figure out how to overcome these dilution effects while still maintaining high yields, and I certainly hope that that works. I'm just a little afraid that it may not be very easy to do. When you've bred a plant to be bigger, the way it does it is by producing more plant, but you haven't been breeding in the capability of producing or absorbing more nutrients at the same time. Now there are scientists who are trying to do that, trying to develop varieties of plants that have higher levels of nutrients, but they're only working on 1 or 2 nutrients at a time. They're only focusing on that. I'm sure they can do it for 1 or 2, but whether they can do it for a whole broad range of nutrients, that's a big question. And it's going to take a lot of research to do that, if it is even possible. Okay. This is a reaction that I've been a little bit surprised to get when I've talked about this material. Several people will say, well, if we've had these declines of nutrients in fruits and vegetables, why don't we just, are we wasting our time eating fruits and vegetables? Should we just forget about them and take a supplement instead? That was a question I got once. Had that thought gone through any of your minds here? I see one nodding head. Well, my answer to this question is a very emphatic no. The reason is that our present day fruits and vegetables are still our most concentrated sources of these, of not only vitamins and minerals, but these beneficial phytochemicals that we're finding are important part of preventing, important part of what makes them valuable to us. They are still by far our richest source. And there are dozens and dozens of studies that show that the more fruits and vegetables that people eat, including in the last few years, the healthier they are in practically any way that you choose to measure them. I mentioned heart disease, cancer, hypertension, diabetes, osteoporosis, you name it. There's probably a study that shows the more fruits and vegetables people eat, the better off they are with respect to those health issues. And there are many, many studies that show that Americans do not consume even the minimum recommended amounts on the average of these fruits and vegetables. And the other aspect of this is that there is no supplement that you can buy that is a substitute for eating the whole food. One of my co-presenters at the meeting in St. Louis last month mentioned a figure of 40,000 for the number of these phytochemicals that we know about in foods. We don't know that they're all beneficial. We don't know which ones are beneficial. We hardly know anything about exactly how they work. But there are these 40,000 things that are in foods that are potentially part of what makes them healthy for us. It's not just the vitamins and minerals that are in foods. If it were just the vitamins and minerals, we could take a pill and get that benefit. But that's not possible. We're not smart enough to make a pill that contains everything in it that fruits and vegetables have. The best way to do that is to eat fruits and vegetables, including those that we're growing today. So I'm going to conclude with this summary of the things that people can do. I'm always glad when people are concerned about nutrition, and it's good to be concerned about declines, but as I'm going to point out in a minute, a lot of people who are worried about declines are looking in the wrong place if they're looking at fruits and vegetables. The things that we can do to improve our nutrition, even before we knew about these nutrient declines, is to eat more fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. This has been a consistent recommendation from nutritionists and the USDA and the FDA for a long time. And the evidence of these declines is just one more reason to do that, to eat more fruits and vegetables. The flip side of that is to eat less of these three things that, if those of you who know me, this is one of my main pet themes in my talk, is to eat less added sugars, added fats, and white flour and white rice. These three categories of food, these are all man-made foods. They do not exist in nature. These three things add up to more than half of the calories consumed in the United States. If you think about them for a second, they're really just cookie ingredients. The basic recipe for making cookies is sugar, white flour, and oil or shortening of some kind. Could be butter, could be olive oil, doesn't matter. Added fats, they're all very similar nutritionally, almost a big zero. You know, I use olive oil, I use butter, but I use a lot less of them than I would if I thought they were good nutritionally. They're not, unfortunately. They taste good, but they're not good nutritionally. They don't exist in nature. So for those people who are concerned about nutrient declines, you really need to be looking at your diet regarding added sugars, added fats, and white flour and white rice, because these three things have all lost much more nutrients than anything I've been talking about for fruits and vegetables here today. When you turn sugar cane or sugar beets into sugar, or you turn corn into high fructose corn syrup that's used in soft drinks, there is 100% total wipeout of every nutrient. We're not talking about 5% or 30% declines. We're not talking about just some nutrients. We're talking about every single one, except calories and the sweet taste that makes it attractive to us. So if you're concerned about declines, you really need to be thinking about this part of your diet first. The added sugars, the added fats, the white flour and white rice that have had the bran and the germ removed, which takes away a whole broad range of vitamins, minerals, fiber, and the phytochemicals that are present in grains too, just like in fruits and vegetables. So that's where I would like to redirect your attention if you're concerned about declines. Another thing that people can do to improve their nutrition is to emphasize fruits and vegetables that have high levels of these antioxidants that we're discovering are important. Some of you may have heard of the ORAC test for antioxidant capacity of fruits and vegetables. It's true that vitamin C and vitamin E are antioxidant, but when you look at the broad antioxidant power of fruits and vegetables, it mostly comes from other things, not the vitamin C and not the vitamin E. It comes from other things. And so it would probably be a good thing for people to do to emphasize foods that are high in these antioxidants, and there's an easy guide to that. It's not perfect, but it's really easy, and that is to look for fruits and vegetables and melons that are intensely colored. It turns out that the intense colors of things like strawberries and blueberries and blackberries And even the color in tea and the color in red wine, these colored things are part of this antioxidant brew that is in fruits and vegetables and in other things. And so when you choose foods like blueberries, for example, that are high in intense colors, you are getting a higher level of antioxidant than in vegetables that don't have the intense colors. This, like I say, this is not a perfect guide. Onions, for example, white onions or yellow onions are also high in antioxidants, and they're not, these particular ones are not colored. It's not perfect, but if you emphasize things like blueberries and sweet potatoes and carrots and purple cabbage and dark green vegetables, you will be increasing your antioxidant intake based on color. And you know, I think it's no accident that we are instinctively attracted to intense colors. It's because they're good for us. And it's so sad that we use artificial colors to make foods look attractive to us, because it's bypassing this mechanism. Nature intended us to go for these high intensity color things, but we play little tricks on ourselves by adding artificial colors to things sometimes, and that's unfortunate. Another thing that people can do is to eat foods that are grown and processed organically, because of the evidence that they tend to have higher levels of these antioxidants. One of the interesting theories about this, by the way, is that part of the reason that plants have these antioxidants in them is as a defense mechanism. They are to protect the plants against sunlight damage. They're also there to protect plants against being eaten on by insects or attacked by bacteria or fungi. And so organically grown foods may benefit in this way, that if we do not protect them with pesticides and herbicides, they have to do more work themselves to protect themselves. And so that is one hypothesis for why organically grown foods have higher levels of these protective antioxidants in them. Now, we can also do research and try to figure out how to reduce the environmental and genetic dilution effects of high-yield crops. And there are people who are working on that, and I wish them great success with that. But that is a long-range research project at best. And it's not clear, to me anyway, what the answer is going to be, whether we can still have high yields and at the same time restore the levels of vitamins and minerals. So these are the things that I would like for people to keep in mind when they learn about this evidence of nutrient declines, that we have it in our power, nearly all of us who are eating any kind of cookie ingredients in our diets, we have the power to undeplete our diet right now. We don't have to wait for the farmers to change. We can do this ourselves. We can also choose foods that are high in in these antioxidants, either organic foods or intensely colored ones. So that's the message that I would like to leave with you about that. Thank you for your attention. We have time for questions. Yeah.
Well, I know for a fact that organic apples keep longer, because I used to buy some at Green Acres that were on. They used to have things half price there. And this is probably before I ever discovered the green bags that you can store fruits and vegetables in to keep longer, that they would keep, amazingly well in the crisper and didn't seem to bother anything else. But my question really is, now that I've rambled on here, I use Veggie Wash on even the strawberries, that I can just something that is called Veggie Wash. It's supposed to, it has like a citrus component to it almost that's natural, where I'm not sure what the component is, but anyway, I think that I'm washing it better. Like strawberries, you can't really wash those, but you could put it in this bowl of veggie wash kind of stuff.
Something to remove pesticide reduce?
But with apples, right.
Yeah.
With apples, we're talking about conventional. Even though I'm doing that and scrubbing really good, that is still under the peel, isn't it, the pesticide? So I might as well just spend the money, save it somewhere else, and buy the organic, because I know that is dessert, and I need to cut out the cookies. So I know that good-tasting apples could be my dessert if I bought the organic.
Yeah. You know, I wish I knew more about that. How much of these residues is on the surface? How much is in the interior? Some of them are in the interior, but many of them are primarily on the surface. And washing does help, but I don't know of any data.
But so people are washing just with warm water, or are they using regular soap?
I don't know.
And then you have to rinse.
I wish somebody would do a good study of this. I know there are products out there that make claims, but they don't publish their data. So I really don't know how well these things work. Does anybody have any knowledge of this?
Hi.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are there any studies on any of the following, comparing the soils in the sense of the minerals that were in that soil originally where that crop was versus the minerals in a different soil to see if the minerals in the soil had any effect on the plant? Any comparison studies with like third world countries that don't use the same techniques that we do? Or ways of irrigation, like this farmer uses less erosion type of irrigation that doesn't washes the minerals away from the soil as the other type of irrigations other people use. And chemical fertilizers versus organic fertilizers.
Well, the last part, chemical fertilizers versus organic fertilizers, I showed you some data in strawberries and apples that doesn't seem to make a difference on the average for vitamins and minerals. It does make a difference, organic culture. I don't know if it's because of the soil or because of the lack of pests chewing on the plants. You know, there may be many aspects. There is a benefit for organic culture, the whole broad aspect of it, for the antioxidant phytochemicals. Your question about the influence of soil, there's no doubt that soil mineral contents does affect the content in the plant, but it's not as easy and simple as you might think. Plants have a mechanism to control how much they uptake. If it's hard to get a mineral out of the soil, they'll work harder at it than a plant that's in a soil that has more in it. So plants have some ability to compensate for low levels in the soil. In the case of the apple study I showed you, that soil in Washington State, they know it's deficient in zinc, and so they spray the plants with foliar zinc. And in that year 2002, they didn't do that, and that's one of the reasons that they had a bad crop that year of apples. And the next year, they did spray zinc on the leaves of the plants. So there are a lot of these complicated interactions, there's no doubt about it. But it's not just the soil, it's the climate, it's the number of hours of sunlight during the day. There are different types of soils. It's very complicated.
Yeah, the effect of GMOs, or genetically modified crops, on phytonutrients levels and things like that. Has there been a study that shows any difference there?
I don't know of any studies of genetically modified organisms on nutrient levels. It's probably too new. It might not have any effect. I don't know. I don't know of any studies.
I have a question about the white rice. And is long grain white rice the same thing as plain white rice, and is like jasmine rice, things like that? Is that the same thing as just white rice?
Okay. When rice grows, it can be long grain, it can be short grain, it can be the jasmine or the basmati type, which has a very nice smell. When those rices, long, short, basmati, when they grow, they're all, quote, brown rice. They all have a bran in the germ. And you can buy all three of those in either the brown form or the white form. Usually what you get is the white form. You have to go to some effort to get the brown form, but they exist. You can buy brown basmati rice, brown short grain rice, and brown long grain rice. So it's a difference. The way they grow, they're all brown the way they grow, and the way they get white is by humans taking off the outer layer, which has the bran and the germ.
The preceding program was presented by the Center for the Improvement of Human Functioning International, Incorporated, Wichita, Kansas. For additional information about the center and a listing of available audio tapes, videotapes, DVDs, and CDs, visit the Bright Spot for Health website at www.brightspot.org.